Today we'll focus on moonshot thinking for sustainable development. In 1961, John F. Kennedy had his famous moonshot speech. And he said, the US should commit itself to achieve the goal before the decade was out of landing a man on the moon and returning safely to the Earth. Now that culminated in the moon landing in 1969. We hear from Neil Armstrong, that's one small step for man and a giant leap for mankind. These words are inspirational, and they have entered the lexicon of moonshot projects, those where innovation can achieve the previously unthinkable, right? Or a difficult task whose outcome is expected to have great significance. Now, there are some ingredients for a moonshot project. It is inspiring. When we think about Kennedy's speech, it raises the spirit, right? It is key to get people to do extraordinary things. But it's also credible. It wasn't a stretched target. His vice president had done a lot of research to make sure that there was reasonable chance of success, and it was imaginative. It wasn't simply an extrapolation of what was possible today, but it actually offered a meaningful break from the past. Now, moonshot thinking is actually something that we have been engaging in the last 20 so years. When we think about the UN Millennium Development Goals from 2000 to 2015, we had these 8 goals that galvanized effort in the low-income countries, right? So eradicating extreme poverty and hunger, achieving universal primary education, reducing child mortality, improving maternal health, just to name a few. And it was so successful that we came up in 2015 with the Agenda 2030, with the UN Sustainable Development Goals that actually are 17 goals that involves all different countries, not only low-income countries, but also high-income countries. Now, what is sustainable development? The Brundtland Commission in 1987 offered a definition that we still use. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, there are some requirements, some necessary conditions for sustainable development, for achieving a sustainable world, right? When we think about renewable resources, we cannot use them faster than the rate at which they regenerate. When we think about pollution and wastes, we cannot emit them faster than the natural systems can absorb them, recycle them, or render them harmless. And then there are non-renewable resources like oil and gas. Well, we cannot use them faster than we find renewable substitutes for them. Okay, now human activity actually consumes renewable resources, emits pollutions and wastes, consumes these non-renewable resources, and they do so faster that we can regenerate, or faster that we can introduce substitutes, or faster waste and pollution that we can render them harmless. So the ecosystem services are not able to regenerate fast enough to absorb and recycle pollution and waste. Our human activity today, and in the last several decades, is inconsistent with a sustainable world. So what can we do? We live in a finite planet with finite resources. Scholars have been talking about dynamics of the world from 50 years ago. This initiated with J. Forrester and World Dynamics, a very famous but controversial book at the time. The world was experiencing amazing growth, wasn't ready for that message. And the limits to growth in 1972 actually mentioned that there were limits that were real and close. There was no time to waste, just exact enough energy, enough materials, money, environmental resilience, human virtue to bring about a revolution to a better world. Now, the limits to growth in 1972 was 50 years earlier, was a very controversial message. Nature has actually just issued an opinion piece focusing on those limits. 50-year anniversary. And we know today there's plenty of research that shows that those limits are real. What we knew 50 years ago is real. So if the world population and the human activity that goes with it has experienced substantial growth, and we are expecting to have almost 8 billion by the end of the year, we cannot grow forever. Human activity on a finite planet cannot continue forever. Now just think about the math. If we have been growing and growing and growing, but we cannot grow forever, what are our possible futures? Well, in one future, we basically can expect a smooth and gradual transition to equilibrium. And that would be wonderful if we could achieve that. But what does it mean when all economies in the world hope that human activity and GDP, gross domestic product, will continue to grow? Well, alternatively and mathematically speaking, if we're not having a smooth transition, well, maybe we overshoot and then we have some fluctuation. But you know, what would be a fluctuation? We overshoot in human activity and then we have a decline. You know, when we think about COVID, there were about 500 million cases in the world. When we think about the COVID-related deaths and excess deaths, we might be talking about 20 million. Unprecedented. These might feel like the fluctuations, but it could be even worse. It could be an overshoot and decline. Such decline that we have experienced in different cultures in the past, right? Like the Maui, right? In Easter Island. Well, how we need to think, how will growth in human activity end? How do we make that transition to a smooth, steady pace? So stable equilibrium. Is it going to be voluntarily, by our choice, or involuntarily imposed by the systems? Is it going to be peaceful or catastrophically or through conflicts? Conflicts for scarce resources. With what population? What standard of living? Will there be equity and social justice? Will we be comfortable with some countries having more, much more, than others? And what should be the role for nature and biodiversity? Certainly areas where we have not taught carefully in the past. So these transitions involve huge technical, economic, political, social, and ethical issues for each of these issues, right? So for each of these questions. And all options are interlinked through the SDGs, right? The Sustainable Development Goals, with an intricate set of feedbacks. This is a moonshot on its own to focus on sustainability. We don't have a way to actually tackle that, but we have hints of what might be possible. In particular, when we think about donut economics, a theory put forward by economist Kate Raworth, it offers a vision for human thriving. You know, it says that the donut economics has two concentric circles. The bottom circle, there is a social foundation that ensures that all humanity right? No one is left falling short. No one is left behind on the life's essentials. And a political voice, and education and health, and food and water, right? And peace and justice. But then, on the other concentric circle, we have an ecological ceiling, beyond which the humanity overshoots planetary boundaries, and we should be mindful not to do so, right? Not to overshoot and generate too much air pollution or ocean acidification, or contribute to climate change, or contribute to climate pollution. Ensure that we don't stretch the planet boundaries on biodiversity loss, or land conversion, or use of fresh water. Between these two concentric circles, a social foundation and an ecological ceiling, that would be the space, the safe and just space for humanity where we could thrive. Now, for all of the possibilities of the donut economics, it's actually very related to a concept that was put forward much earlier by John Stuart Mill, an economist in the mid-1800s. In 1848, John Stuart Mill put forward this notion of the stationary state, where economies would not be growing forever, which is the aspiration of today. And he claimed that the stationary state was inevitable, necessary, and desirable. Why desirable? Well, because it would ease the introduction of public income redistribution schemes, creating more equality and putting an end to man's ruthless struggle to get by. Think about it. That's akin to the social foundation. It was necessary, right? The steady state was necessary because then mankind had to learn how to reduce its size and its level of consumption, ensuring that it were within the boundaries set by nature. This was exactly what we think about as the ecological ceiling. And it was also inevitable. Inevitable because the accumulation of capital diminishes investment opportunities in the future and hampers future accumulation. And so it gives us a glimpse of our living space. Mill was also very hopeful about this message about the stationary state, because he claimed as a result, the human spirit can be liberated to the benefit of more elevated social and cultural activities. So this is my message for a sustainable development where we respect social foundations, fight to maintain our consumption and human activity below ecological ceilings, and try to thrive in a safe and dignified living space. Thank you.